Hey everyone, and welcome to this, a YouTube product demo put together by me, Patrick Gray, at Risky Business. And the idea behind these videos is that people who are interested in taking a look at a product can actually see it in action. These are, of course, sponsored videos, so everyone you see in one of these paid to be here. And I'm very happy that we are joined today by Paul Lanzi. He is the co-founder and COO of Remediant. I think in previous podcast interviews, I've given Paul every title from CEO to CTO. But yes, he is in fact the COO of Remediant. And he's going to be demoing their product today. And Paul, why don't you just start off by giving us a nice 60 to 90 second description of what Remediant actually does.
Yeah, for sure, Pat. It's really good to see you again. Glad to be here and doing a demo of our product, which is called Secure One. You know, Tim, my co-founder, and I, we created Secure One because working in enterprise IT, we saw this pervasive problem of there just being way too much admin rights across the entire ecosystem. And whether it was Windows systems, Mac systems, or Linux systems, the amount of privileged access in the environment would only ever go up. And attackers knew this, and so as soon as an attacker was able to compromise one privileged account, they're able to use it to move laterally across the enterprise. And once that started to happen, it was really difficult to stop them. And we thought that there were sort of two major problems to be solved. One was simply providing visibility into who had privileged access where across the environment. And then the second was to get rid of those standing privileged access rights and replace them with just-in-time access so that a given user wouldn't have privileged access until they actually needed it, and then they would only have the access that they needed for the time that they needed it. That way, if their account was ever actually compromised, the attacker wouldn't be able to use it to move laterally in the environment. So that's what we've developed and delivered. We've got some great customers. Lockheed Martin is a public reference customer for us, but we have lots of other Fortune 500 and many smaller customers as well. And looking forward to showing you what that looks like today.
All right, so just before we get into the demo, just very quickly, can you give us just a 1-minute overview on how the product actually works? Because it is a little bit different to other PAM solutions in the market. So people might have been listening to this and going, oh, they're a password vault play or something like that, right? But the Remediant product is actually quite substantially different to others. So if you could just give us a very tight explanation of like what the product is, what do you get when you buy it?
Yeah, for sure. You know, we're not a password vault. We're not a secrets management tool at all. We're all about discovering access rights. And we do that without installing another agent on the environment. And you'll see in the demo today how we do the discovery of privileged access rights in an agentless way. And then the second thing we do is permit just-in-time access. So when you click a button in the UI, you're permitted that privileged access on a given system. And then it's up to you what tools you want to use to utilize that privileged access. You might use a remote PowerShell, you might SSH in and use sudo, but those access rights are associated with your actual account. And so we never know your password, we never change your password. So it's not really a credential management tool, but we protect all of that with multi-factor authentication when you log into our system.
Okay, well, I think at this point, look at this. I press the magic button and we get your screen. At this point, it makes sense to actually load up your screen. So what are you gonna show us first?
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and log in here with multi-factor authentication. We are the biggest believers in that. This particular environment is configured with using Google Authenticator as the second factor, but if the organization is already using some other 2FA solution, we'll just simply use that instead. So I'm going to go ahead and log in here. I actually typed my password correctly, which is a good sign. And you're brought here to our Secure One dashboard. And there's a couple things going on here. The most important is up here in the upper right-hand corner. We're talking about the scan performance. This is that agentless discovery that I mentioned, going out and figuring out who has privileged access where across the environment. And interestingly, in order to discover privileged access on Windows systems, we actually don't even need a privileged account ourselves. We can do that with a non-privileged account. Interesting security choice by Microsoft many, many years ago, but it does mean that we're able to very rapidly deploy and discover the quantity of privileged access across a Windows environment. Now, for Mac and Linux systems, we do need some amount of privileged access in order to discover who has privileged rights on those systems, and I'll show you those down here in just a few minutes.
Just to clarify for people who might be wondering, like, how is it that you actually deploy? Is this like a rack-mountable hardware device? Is it an agent that you run on a server? Like, how do you actually deploy your technology into an environment?
Yeah, if you want a physical appliance, you're welcome to do that. We also deploy as most commonly as a virtual machine, or we have an AMI for AWS deployments or similar deployment methods for GCP and Azure as well. So you can take our virtual appliance and you can deploy it in whichever environments you want to run this in. It is specifically engineered to be able to operate in fully air-gapped environments. So as long as it can talk to the Active Directory domain controller, and as long as it can talk to the target systems, the things you're actually trying to manage privileged access on, we're good to go.
Okay, so it doesn't need to be able to be on the domain. It doesn't need to be on the domain controller. It just needs to be able to talk to it.
That's right. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And in this specific environment, we have only one domain configured. It is very creatively called the Secure One domain. But in production environments, we have customers with as many as 30 or 40 separate domains, inter-domain trusts, complicated forest arrangements. We've seen it all. And the solution can work in all those environments.
I don't even want to know the horrors you've seen making a product like this. Some real Marlon Brando and Apocalypse Now vibes, I imagine.
I still think Adam has probably seen worse horror shows than I've seen, but we've seen some pretty bad ones out there. Yeah, pretty bad ones. So the result of that discovery is you're seeing some force ranked lists of the highest privileged accounts and the highest risk systems in this totally real, not at all dummied up data set that we're looking at in this demo environment. This is showing that this El Torres account has privileged access on over 9,000 systems. And I wish I could say that this was totally unrealistic. And in reality, admins have much less access than this. But the reality is that in the real world, we often find that the admins have tens of thousands of systems, if not in some cases hundreds of thousands of systems on which they have persistent 24/7 privileged access. There's even more horror show to be seen. So let me zoom in a little bit more on what that horror show looks like. So we talked about this El Torres user being the most privileged user with over 9,000 systems. But here you can see that force ranked list as it goes down, and you can see the users and groups that have privileged access. And again, same view for the different systems and how much privileged access across the environment is there.
Now, what are these accounts? Are they normally like service accounts, or are they actual human users that have just been sort of misconfigured?
Interestingly, it's a mix of both. And even environments where there are secondary accounts, like you can see here, there's a couple of ADM accounts listed here. So in this demo environment, we've tried to segregate access so that the ADM users are the only ones, quote unquote, only ones with privileged access. But you can see also in this list that there are some users quite high in this list, like Jay Butler. It's not an ADM account, but this particular user has privileged access on the same 9,000 systems. We see that very commonly in environments where they've tried to bifurcate the accounts and the privileged access, but we often discover that sort of the non-ADM accounts often have quite a bit of privileged access as well. One of the new things we've launched here is what we call the Access Risk Dashboard. And this is really interesting for a couple of reasons. One, it's showing the change in privilege access over time. So this is a 90-day window, and it's showing you not just users with privilege access, that's the direct access, but also groups with privilege access. And then if you scroll down here, you can actually see, so I'll just click on one of these days here, you can actually see which groups are providing how many systems worth of access and whether they have domain access or not. And by our definition of domain access means that if this account was to be compromised or if a new user was added to this group, the risk of whole domain compromise would be very high. And that's because they're a member of something like domain admins or enterprise admins or schema admins. And this is different than those ones that say false here, where a given a given group like this L2 support group would have privilege access, in this case, just to one system with the 34 users, but it wouldn't immediately provide domain-wide ownership to an attacker.
Yeah, so it's not insta-win for the attacker, but still not great.
Still not great. And the really cool thing about this visualization is you can go back in time and see exactly what the data was on any given day. So if I'll just pick another day here, 10/10, and I scroll down here, I can see not just the groups, but also the users with privilege access. And so there's this really suspicious looking guy here, this demo P Lanzi user had privilege access on one system during that time. We also can see this as it's segregated between workstations and servers. So if you're interested in, say, let's look at that same day, and you want to see how many servers versus workstations a given user or a given group had access to, you can see this here. And so this gives you a really good idea of the cross segregation potential for account compromise or group membership compromise that would permit. And so that can give you a really good visualization into the security risk to move between tiers in your environment.
Now, you've got one more pane there to show us of the analysis side of it before we get to the action side. Walk us through that one.
Yeah, and that's our cumulative access screen. So if you want to know across the entire environment, say, again, we'll pick that same day, servers plus workstations across the environment, who had privileged access, what does that look like, how is that changing over time? The cumulative screen will give that to you. And again, this is inclusive of, say, cloud workloads like EC2 machines. You've got your virtual machines in here. You've got your physical laptops, your physical servers, et cetera. You've got data from all of those being brought together in this visualization. So you can see exactly who had privileged access, what groups had privileged access on that day. Very useful, by the way, in the case of incident investigation, or if you're just trying to trend down your amount of privileged access in the environment, which is one of the things that we help you to do, and as I'll show you next. If you're wanting to track that and quantify that, these screens are really useful for that.
Yeah, I'd imagine it's like a nice little barometer of, are we moving in the right direction when it comes to this stuff? Just having that visualization. Okay, so the question then becomes, what do you then do about it? Show us the part where you've identified the horror show. How do we fix it, Paul?
Yeah, that's right. So once you've seen what a horror show you've got going on as far as privileged access is concerned, the next step is to start solving that problem. And that's where what we call protect mode comes in. So I'll jump in here to a specific server. This is one of our demo servers, HR server. This particular system has protect mode disabled. And that means that all of these users and groups that are listed over here on the right-hand side, what we call the inventory, all have persistent 24/7 privilege access on the system. So any member of the desktop support group, the L2 support group, or the service group, or this user AAA Berg, all have 24/7 privilege access on the system. And we could go to look at the other screens to see what the fully decomposed membership of those groups is. But net, this server probably has about 100 or so people that's having privilege access to it right now. And if we wanted to take that from 100 down to 0, that's that barometer you were talking about. If you want to measure the reduction in the lateral movement potential on the system, all we have to do is enable privilege access on the system and rescan it. Now what that's going to do is our solution is going to reach out. It's going to remove all the users who had privilege access on that system. It's going to remove all of their privilege access, but it's keeping a record of who used to have privilege access on that system. And then that becomes the baseline set of users and groups that can now come here and get just-in-time access to the system. So that system has gone from, if any one of those roughly 100 accounts was compromised, the system is now at very good risk of being compromised, down to approximately 0 accounts having privilege access on the system, so that the threat landscape is much smaller for the system.
So you did just mention that your product will keep a record of the user accounts that did have privileged access on that system. Does that mean that you're sticking that into some sort of directory in your product, or how is that information stored?
Yeah, we keep that in our database, and you can manipulate that as well. So if you wanted to, for instance, get rid of this AAA Berg user, say, all right, AAA Berg, you're no longer allowed to get just-in-time access on the system. All you have to do is to remove admin, and now AAA Berg is no longer in the list of users with that entitlement to come here and get just-in-time access.
So you nuke privilege from the environment, you corral that onto your system, and then if you want to proper crush it, so even disable just-in-time access, that's something you can do.
Absolutely. And if I wanted to add someone, let's see if we've got a Patrick in here who we can permit just-in-time access. Oh, are you okay being ePatrick?
Hey, I'm already on that box. It's fine.
All right. So I like it. So if we wanted to get ePatrick here, who's already on the box, just-in-time access, all we have to do is that. And now ePatrick is listed here as someone who's allowed to come here and get that just-in-time access. And if you already have tools like SailPoint that are doing IGA type things, we have interfaces and integrations with those so that you can do those workflows in those IGA tools. And then the result of those entitlements, grants, or removals will immediately be reflected in our platform as well.
Now, look, I've got to ask too, at this point, when you're enabling, just-in-time access only for all users of that box, is that going to break a whole bunch of, service agents and, backup software and all of those little, automated worker scripts that come in and, do little tasks on that box, vulnerability scanning agents and patching and, all of that sort of stuff that happens in the background? How do you not break that stuff?
Yeah, there's two different ways we can avoid breaking that. One of them is that those solutions can actually use our API to get just-in-time access for those service accounts. So rather than the first thing that your script does is, start running remote PowerShell using your service account on, Patrick's laptop, the first thing it would do is call our API, say, all right, I need privileged access on Patrick's laptop. We'll allocate that privileged access to that service account, and then it can go do its crazy business. And then that service account can then lose that privileged access when that business is over. So we have an API that's...
So you're essentially like a privileged broker at that point.
That's right, exactly.
But you're centralized across multiple domains, forests, etc.
That's right. And we're keeping records of what privileged access was granted at what time, and we make sure that privileged access gets cleaned up, even if the script forgets to clean up the privileged access request itself. The second way we can solve this problem is to grant persistent privilege access to the service accounts on an as-needed basis. So if you know that your backup agent needs to have 24/7 privilege access on every system, we have some really simple automated ways to do that as well, to ensure that that account gets that privilege access. Even on new systems that get set up in the future, we'll make sure that that account is granted that persistent privilege access as well.
But I'm guessing the way that you would recommend is to go via the API route.
100%. That's right, the just-in-time access. So, but let's say that I'm not a service account. Let's say I'm actually a meat and bones kind of guy, and I've come here to this HR server with the intention of applying some patches. So I would type in HR server like I did earlier, and then to get privilege access on the system, because I'm a member of this L2 support group, all I have to do is press this access system button and then give a reason. So I'm going to say this is to apply Windows patches. Something we should all be doing all the time. Now, what's happening in the background is Secure One is reaching out to that system and then allocating my account, my actual P. Lanzi account, privilege access on this system for the next 4 hours. So at 7:06 p.m. Pacific, the privilege access for that account will automatically be removed from HR server. But until then, I can do things like RDP into the system. So I'm going to go ahead and fire up an RDP window here. Probably type my password wrong. And now I actually have admin rights on the system that are useful for applying patches or changing other configurations on the system, rebooting the system, whatever it is. I've got the privilege access on this system to go do the things I need to go do, but only for the next 4 hours. And so if I wanted to, I don't know, go and edit the registry or add a new device to the system or change print drivers or whatever, I've got those access rights to do that on the system.
Now I got to ask too, like everything that we're talking about, it's like old school Windows domains, etc., like Windows networks. Are you doing much with like Azure AD and cloud privilege with this stuff?
Yeah, so we're working on our Azure AD integration now, so you can do all these same things, even if the system is not joined to a classic Active Directory environment, but is Azure AD joined. And I'll actually show you some of the EDR integrations we've worked on next. There's actually some pretty cool stuff we developed with that as well.
I was getting ahead of myself, but the EDR stuff is cool. Show us that. Yeah.
All right, very good. So now that let's say I'm done applying patches on this particular system, all I have to do is close my RDP window. And then at 7:06, my privilege access will automatically be removed from the system, but I can also expire it early. So if I know I'm done with privilege access on this system, I just hit expire system, and you can see here now that I've now been removed from privilege access on this environment, on the system, and I can going on to do the next thing. So the next thing I actually wanted to show you is some of those EDR integrations. So I'm going to jump over to a different server here. So this particular server is already in protect mode, and it is unreachable by our system. So if I hit rescan, it's going to complain that I am unable to connect to the system. We tried the last known IP address. We tried doing a DNS lookup. We weren't able to connect. But we're now trying to connect using the CrowdStrike agent. So we now have an integration with CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, and Carbon Black, where if we can't contact the system directly, we'll contact the control plane for the EDR solution and say, hey, EDR solution, do you have a connection to this particular system? Is your connection active? And if so, can you please execute these commands for us and give us back the results, just like we would have done if we were able to contact that system directly. So in this example, we're using CrowdStrike's Falcon agent on the system to rescan the system and then return those rescan results back to Secure One.
And are you doing that with some sort of PowerShell malarkey, or how's that work?
It's using the native APIs for the different EDR solutions. So each one of them works in its own special different way. Sometimes it's using PowerShell, or for Linux systems, shell scripts, or Mac systems, shell scripts under the covers. Other ones have different different mechanisms. But you can see here that in a little bit under a minute, we were able to refresh that system using the API connection through the CrowdStrike Falcon platform, so that even if this was a fully zero trust environment with no direct connection between our virtual machine and the target system, even in the zero trust environments, we were able to do all the things we were normally able to do using our solution. One of the other things that comes up quite often is, well, what if I wanted to see exactly what an administrator did on this system during their just-in-time access session? And sort of the classic way you would do this is session recording, right? So you would set up these video jump boxes, you would force all the administrators to use the stupid video jump boxes, and you would end up with terabytes of video files of recordings of administrators clicking on buttons. None of that is particularly helpful or useful other than checking off the compliance requirement that, yes, we have a video record of what Paul did during his admin.
Yeah, checking off a compliance checkbox that says we've spent a lot of money on storage.
That's right. And will forever and never look at those videos, right? So we thought there's got to be a better way. And so the better way that we came up with is to leverage the EDR agent that's already on there. It's already capturing a lot of reusable information and then tying that back to the user's just-in-time access session. So you can see in this environment, there's this investigate session button here. So I'm going to click on this investigate session button. It's going to take me into, in this case, CrowdStrike's Falcon visibility agent investigate host view. It's going to have pre-populated the host name, the start time, and the end time for that just-in-time access session. So I can see exactly what happened on that system during that just-in-time access session. If I scroll down here, you'll see that I can actually take a look at, say, certain processes and services that were executed. This particular environment was set up with some suspicious activity, so that P. Lanzi user was off doing some terrible things earlier.
Sounds like him.
It does sound like that P. Lanzi user here. So you can see this P. Lanzi user was running some encoded PowerShell commands. That's never suspicious. If I search for this particular string, you might see that some new users were created, some new local users were created, and possibly granted admin rights as well. So these sort of suspicious process executions seen here in the EDR solution can then be blocked from future execution by just clicking on them here in the EDR solution. And that's different. One EDR solution works differently than others. But the idea is that you can come here and see exactly what this P. Lanzi user was doing on the system during their just-in-time access session. And then if there's malicious things here, you can stop any further executions of those right in the same UI as well.
It's funny, it's something that I've said to you before, but integrating, building an integration between EDR and PAM is the sort of thing that doesn't make sense until you've done it. And then it's like, oh, it actually does make sense.
We think so. And having that integration with not just CrowdStrike, but also SentinelOne and Carbon Black's agent means that we can cover a lot of the namespace in the EDR world.
Yeah, I mean, you've covered a lot of the market there, right? Because there's not that many EDR vendors with huge market share.
That's right, exactly. And the utility of doing this not just for threat hunting, but also threat elimination is really powerful. It brings together the identity world and the endpoint security world together through the EDR solution itself.
Well, handy for IR, definitely, you'd think.
Yeah. Well, and also from that, you were talking about compliance, right? So if you need to check that box with the compliance team and say, all right, the compliance team comes to you and says, all right, Patrick, prove to me that you know exactly what admin users did during their just-in-time admin sessions. Hey, here you go, right? Here's the data right here. And I had to spend $0 additional dollars to get that. Look,
I mean, I'm going off piste a little bit here, but I would say that for a long time, privileged access management has been compliance spend, right? That's why people get it. They don't actually expect it to be useful. This is the sad thing with a lot of compliance spend. And that's encouraged maybe a little bit of complacency in the broader PAM ecosystem. I think, what's interesting here is you've taken a category that has been just, compliance spend, tick the box. And, it can be a pain to get it going. I mean, it does give you security gains, but it's kind of a pain, whereas this looks to be quicker. Quicker and actually delivers something quite useful and simpler. Simpler to deploy and roll out generally results in better outcomes because it's easy to get comprehensive with something like this.
Well, I mean,
you don't need agents everywhere, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, right. I mean, raise your hand if you've seen shelfware exist, right, that had a lot of promise but never actually got delivered because the lift to either deploy it or to use it was so high. That's the thing that we specialize in avoiding, is because we're super easy to deploy, super easy to use, we can avoid it turning into shelfware. There is one other thing I wanted to show you, and that's our Linux support. So those of you that have dealt with Linux in various forms for some time know that trying to do sudo management across an entire ecosystem is extremely difficult, right? And so other than doing not great things like ensuring that the sudo file is the same on every system, this gets really difficult to do at scale. And other PAM solutions have solved this by replacing the PAM module in Linux, but that's pretty disruptive, right? And that causes a lot of challenges on its own. So what you're seeing here is an EC2 instance that we've set up. It's not known by anything other than its IP address. It's pretty much brand new. And over on here on the right-hand side is, again, that list, that inventory of who's allowed to get privileged access to the system. And you can see I'm actually not in this list. So if I press access system, even if I give a good reason, like I want to do a demo for Pat, it's going to tell me, nope, Paul, you are not allowed to do that. You do not have privileged access. You don't have the ability to get just-in-time access on the system. But because I'm an administrator in Secure One, I can also go ahead and give myself those just-in-time admin rights. I'm going to give myself all sudo permissions just for simplicity's sake, but I also could specify specific sudo permissions if it was a limited privilege access and solution that I needed to deploy there. So now that the Lanzi user is listed here, I can press this access system button. I'm going to give an even better reason, which is I really want to do a demo for Pat.
As you should. As you should.
As I should. Now, what's happening behind the scenes is a new account, a new local account is being created for me on the system. Now, this system is not domain joined. It is a brand new EC2 instance that was just spun up. It doesn't know anything about Active Directory. It doesn't know anything about replacing PAM modules at all. It is a default EC2 instance. But now I can actually SSH right into this system. So I'm going to fire up PuTTY here. I can actually just SSH right into the system using my Active Directory domain credentials. So I'm going to say Lanzi here. Boom, and now I'm in. So I didn't have to set a new password. Secure One didn't have to know a password about me. It just was able to set this to my Active Directory domain credentials so I could immediately log in here and start doing whatever work I needed to do. Now, because I chose full sudo rights before, I can do sudo bash, and now I'm root. And so now I can do whatever I need to do during this just-in-time access session, in this case for the next 4 hours until 7:16 p.m. when my access rights will be removed from the system. And then it will go back to that zero trust state where no one has privileged access to it at all. So the benefit for teams like DevOps teams that are constantly spinning up and spinning down Linux systems in the cloud is that now they don't have to worry about too many people having privileged access to the systems, and also the right people on the DevOps team or the SRE team or whatever it is can get privileged access on those target hosts when they need it. Even better, the security team has visibility into what systems are getting what privilege access allocated on them at what times, so that if there ever is an incident investigation, you can go back in time and see who had privilege access where, when. Now that I'm done with the system, all I have to do is log off the system, and I can even expire my privilege access on this environment now that I'm done with it, and it goes back to that zero trust state, which is exactly what you want all your production systems to be in, which is no one has privilege access to them until someone needs it.
Well, Paul, that actually looks like a pretty comprehensive overview there, which is, look, it's always a really positive thing when you can do a comprehensive overview of a product in a short amount of time. If it takes 2 hours to demo, that's a bit of a red flag.
Yeah, we don't even take 2 hours to deploy, so.
Hey, that's something worth pointing out, right? Like I kind of alluded to it earlier that it's a simple rollout, but it is something that can often be actually rolled out in a couple of hours, so that's something for people to keep in mind. And I'm guessing for anyone who's interested in further info, they should just contact you via Remediant.com.
That's right, yeah, Remediant.com, or send us an email, info@remediant.com. Happy to be in touch.
Or they can send a webmail. They might be using Gmail. It's all webmail now. A lot of it is.
All the things. We're on all the channels.
All right, Paul Lanzi, COO of Remediant. Thank you so much for joining us to walk us through the product Secure One. It's been a really valuable session. Thank you so much.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks, Pat.
And that's it from us. I do hope you've enjoyed this demo video. I am, of course, on risky.biz with regular audio podcasts if that's something you're interested in. But again, do hope you enjoyed the video, and you can check out Remediant at remediant.com. Cheers.